Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. This is Conversations on Retail, and we are joined today by Heath Willis, who's the global head of thebar.com, which is a property owned by Diageo. And for those of you that are just now joining us, Heath and I crossed paths a little bit a long time ago. He was joining Walmart's marketing department as I was leaving the company, and it's been a lot of fun for me personally to watch Heath's career take off and do a lot of really cool things. And he's going to have an opportunity to kind of talk about that. But Heath, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you making the time to be here.
Absolutely, Matt. Thank you for inviting me.
So one of the things that makes Conversations on Retail different than your normal podcast is we do invite a live audience to join in on the conversation. And we've got a handful of folks that have already joined, and I'm expecting a handful more. So the thing I would say to those of you that are here is I would just encourage you, if you've got questions or if you've got insights that you'd like to offer, hit the Q&A button within Zoom and go ahead and submit those questions. And then as many as we can possibly get to, we'll share those with Heath at the very end. So Heath, if you would just start off, introduce yourself and kind of talk about your professional journey. Obviously you and I crossed paths at Walmart, but then you went on to have a remarkable career at Coca-Cola and some other assignments, and now at Diageo. So introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, happy to. So as Matt mentioned, we worked together quite a few eons ago at Walmart, and the evolution of the Smart Spark and all the different fun things that were happening during that time at Walmart. It was growing exponentially, which was a lot of fun. But a lot of my career has been based in digital over the last 20 or so years in a variety of different roles. As Matt mentioned, I was brought into Walmart to help lead the Walmart.com in-store team in the first kind of iteration of when they were taking the layaway sections out of the stores and creating a order online, pick up in store kind of environment for the Walmart stores in the US. From that point, I moved into a role where I was leading category marketing for dry grocery for the US Supercenter. So I had the Cokes and Pepsis and Mills and those types of CPGs of the world calling on me in that particular role. I switched sides of the desk, moved to Atlanta, and worked for Coca-Cola for a variety of different roles, servicing Walmart, but also Amazon and some other kind of global retailers over the 10 or 12 years or so that I was at Walmart and at Coca-Cola. After I left that role, moved into a couple of different CPG, different types of hardline type of roles where I was leading from a VPGM perspective, the e-commerce journey, and these companies were at kind of different stages and iterations of where they were on that journey. So it was really kind of fascinating to, be able to kind of roll up my sleeves in a smaller organization and really be able to see my impact directly affect on some of the ones that were kind of going on that journey from an e-commerce perspective at a very early stage. And so that really is what led me to Diageo. There's a couple of counterparts of mine from Coca-Cola who matriculated there. It's a company that from a cultural perspective, from an ethos perspective, in a lot of different ways, I have admired over the years. So when the opportunity came for me to join up with them, that was pretty much a no-brainer. But what I've been doing since I've been at Diageo is really helping them create and forge the path forward towards their relationships that they're having directly with consumers. So in markets outside of the US where you don't have the three-tier system or the prohibition age types of requirements or restrictions, we can sell directly to consumers. So we've done that in a variety of ways with some of our Scotch whiskeys, which some of our brands would be very recognizable to, I'm sure, folks that are on the line, such as the Singleton and Oban and Johnny Walker brands such as that. So that's really where we're the heaviest engaged in terms of kind of our products from a Diageo perspective is in Scotch whiskey, but obviously brands such as Guinness, Crown Royal, Captain Morgan, Tanqueray, brands like that that are great and beloved all over the world are ours as well. So being able to understand more about our consumers, help informing some of our product development, some of our innovation, things of that sort, and really just trying to get on top of the first party data has been something that Diageo has really been looking to do a lot more. And I don't know if it's going to become the impetus of our discussion is how we kind of got on that journey. But that's really what I've been doing over the course of the last little over a year.
Yeah. Well, to back up just a little bit, I mean, a lot of the work you're doing, especially earlier in your career, to say it was pioneering would be an understatement. I mean, it was really a period of time where folks like yourself and everybody else was kind of learning as you went. What were those early days like as companies like Walmart and the big brands were trying to figure out what e-commerce even looked like, and some of the challenges within certain categories? A lot of people forever said that food, it would never work with food, right? And so talk about some of the early days as you might remember them, and some of the pioneering that was taking place, the big learnings.
I think a lot of it, Matt, was around kind of feeling like every day you were pushing water uphill. You'd have a couple of people in every organization that would be believers of the digital journey and understand and see the vision of where it was going. But in a lot of other cases, it was very difficult to get very senior stakeholders to not only engage with you in terms of where that roadmap was going, but even more importantly, to believe in it from a funding perspective to help be able to dedicate the resources required, whether it be people or financing, whatever, to be able to expand on that journey. So it was basically carving it out of a marketing budget. So you could either do this or you can do that, instead of saying, yes, we believe in that. We know it's going to be a bit of a slow drip, but let's invest in that because we understand that it actually could have some applicability to our business going forward. So I think one of the things that was the biggest challenge to me, especially as I've gone to a couple of organizations, is that they do become very headstrong in terms of their brands, and they feel like their brand should lead and the retailers or consumers are secondary. So you're having a conversation at a consumer versus with a consumer. And really, as we've learned more about digital and that path to purchase and how people engage in online influencing offline and things of that sort, there's needed to be a recognition that I'm slowly starting to see a lot of companies come toward, which is a recognition of saying we need to have a conversation with consumers. We need to be at a place where they have passion points. We need to be at a place where we can be relevant but not heavy-handed, and be able to learn what those passion points are so that we can integrate those into our overall strategy. And that's really one of the biggest things I've seen probably over the last decade or so, is it's not necessarily a one-directional conversation. It's companies being more willing to understand what those passion points of consumers are, and then figure out ways digitally to fit in with that passion point and to fit in with that digital journey as the people are making those decisions.
It's been so much fun to watch. I mean, just as a student of the business, not a practitioner as you've been. I've been on the outside now for 17 years, involved in supplier education, supplier development, those sorts of things. But as a student of the business, just watching brands and companies try to keep pace with an ever-changing consumer in terms of their demands. I mean, the shopper is wicked smart. They're not standing still. They've got more and more demands, and to watch these brands just become more and more agile to move at the pace or even slightly ahead of where that shopper is. It's just been so much fun to watch. And as Heath mentioned, he's here today to talk about how the pandemic focused Diageo's attention on leveraging digital channels to connect with consumers and bartenders in new ways. And so he's going to be kicking that off in just a second. But again, just a really quick reminder, we've already got 4 questions that have come in. Great questions. Thank you so much. The whole point of getting together today is not just so you can eavesdrop on a conversation between Heath and I, but is to give you an opportunity to kind of participate in that conversation. So anything that's relevant to the topic, or any kind of question you have about the industry, about e-commerce, anything at all, submit. Hit the Q&A button and submit those questions. So Heath, if you would kick it off, share kind of what that aha moment was, or what the pain point was at Diageo that got everyone's attention and caused you to start to reimagine what digital channels might look like in terms of enabling business growth.
I'd say it was probably a bit of a slow drip, but obviously when you have an organization that has so much of its products that are dependent on being served on premise, and then you wake up one day and on-premise kind of goes away, you've got to figure out different ways to engage with consumers to get your product enjoyed or to be consumed in alternate channels or in alternate ways. And so Diageo was on that journey prior to me even getting there. But by the same token, we really have seen an acceleration as an organization moving that direction for a variety of reasons. I would say one of them, first and foremost, and a lot of people who are on the line are probably very familiar with it, you have your Walmarts and your Amazons, and they're very much walled gardens, right? You can kind of see a little bit of what the data brings you back, and then there's third-party providers who can give you a stitched version of kind of filling in some of the gaps, but end to end, you're not getting the whole story, not the same way that you would if you were having that one-to-one relationship with the consumer. Our brands, I think, are very passion point brands where people want to come and immerse themselves. So we have the Guinness Storehouse, for example, in Ireland. Stateside, we actually have Guinness's Open Gate Brewery that's in Baltimore. So we have different attractions where people will come and engage with our brands, but then figuring out how do we carry that resonance beyond that experience. That's a really important way for us to be able to enhance that relationship, to be able to broaden our conversation longer term with consumers, and then be able to introduce new products in a very safe safe environment because you've got consumers who already have opted in or already have some sort of level of engagement or permissibility with your brand, that you can try new things. So when COVID hit, we really became an organization that figured out that we needed to pivot very quickly, but we also had the bar.com, which was a platform that we've been using in various iterations, which was really just a recipe site in different parts of the world that we figured, one, we can take this property, the bar, and actually create a digitally native brand out of it and be something that we can own. So that's one component. Then the second part of it was, how do we take the technology, I call it kind of the underneath the water part of the iceberg, to create a tech platform that we can lift and shift and use in different markets around the world. So that really became the charge of our organization, is to figure out ways that we could create a very scalable and malleable platform that, depending on what markets, such as the US or India, for example, where you can't sell beverage directly to consumers, could still have an engagement point, could still sell tickets to attractions, could still sell merchandise and things of that sort. But in other markets like the UK and other markets in Europe where we can directly transact, what could that journey look like if we sold it under the bar.com? So that really has been the impetus of us really shifting very quickly in terms of saying, we still have our relationships that we'll always have with the Amazons and the Tescos and all of those different types of retailers, but how do we get smarter about bringing people into our own ecosystem, giving them a reason to opt in and have relationships with us one-to-one from a digital perspective, but then also being able to give them things to surprise and delight that they may not be able to find in the Amazons and Walmarts of the world, such as rare and exceptional whiskeys, for example, or limited edition types of runs of things that we can only do. So from a content perspective, from a product perspective, all of those, we knew that we could be the single source of truth to be able to provide those to consumers, which is a very exciting proposition to be able to have. It's how do we use technology to enable us to be able to do that so that we can lower the cost for our markets to be able to do a direct to consumer type of iteration and get them engaged and excited, because disproportionately, a lot of the resources in our markets go towards servicing the on-trade, so the bars and nightclubs, things of that sort, but then also to the Amazons and the big retailers of the world. Whereas this is a small part of the business and probably will always be fairly small, but the data and the insights that we get out of it and the analytics we can mine become really robust and exciting for us to be able to say, what do consumers think about this? Maybe it's a canary in a coal mine situation where we try it online, and if it starts to take fire, we bring it into an Amazon or somebody with a proof point to say, we tried it in our own network, we see it actually works, we think it'll work for you. So it's really kind of flipping that model on its head and being able to say, from a direct to consumer perspective, us as the retailer, or excuse me, as the manufacturer, not necessarily acting as a retailer in these markets, but definitely being able to have a lot of the integration points and data connections that standard retailers do that we typically work with.
I'm glad you mentioned what you did. Somebody already asked a question about, the value of first party data, and I'd love for you to speak about that a little bit more maybe, but I think that's a lot of times we forget about the value of that data we're collecting, and we look at e-commerce purely as dollars and cents driving sales, and what you're doing now, as you alluded, is as much, if not more, about just developing that relationship and gathering much of that first party data that can then be deployed throughout every other part of your business.
Yes, I think that's a really critical component for us, just because we feel like it has been bandied about quite a bit in digital spaces, that kind of data is the new oil, right? So being able to have access to that you can have and have that one-to-one conversation is a really critical way for us to be able to engage with consumers and be able to build not only brand love, but also to drive repeat in markets where we can transact with some of those consumers. So I think one of the critical components for us to be able to do that is being able to have the strength of brands that we have, which we're blessed enough to have in nearly every kind of spirits category, as well as beer in different parts of the world. But what we're really looking to do now is accelerate into that in different ways, and also digitizing in a much bigger way, even for the on-trade. So we have what we call the Diageo Bar Academy, which essentially is a repository for us to be able to have relationships with bartenders and bar owners, club owners, and folks to be able to understand how to use our brands, how to upsell our brands, how to be able to have people have even better celebrations with our brands, digitizing that in such a way so that we can accelerate not only in the on-trade, but also in the in-home celebration occasion, all of those different areas where we can go and we feel like we have a right to win based on the strength of our brands and based on our portfolio and what kind of knowledge we can bring to them. So I think the amalgam all of this together becomes really critical for us to be able to say we want to have an aspiration to be a digital leader. We're not there yet. We're on that journey, but we feel like we've got the strength of brands. We think we've got the know-how from a digital capability perspective, and we're learning more every day with a lot of the digital deployments we have, such as the bar.com and malts.com, which is our malt whiskey site where we sell to consumers, that we can bring all of this knowledge to bear and be able to kind of help our markets who are very nascent on the journey understand what success could look like over the next couple of years, and then be able to extract and take a lot of that consumer data and be able to pull it back into the business to help inform insights in our business plans.
So what does success look like in the early part of the pandemic as you started to kind of move more toward this new thought process? What were some of the early successes, and how has that evolved in the months and now, a couple of years since?
I'd say early in the pandemic, we did a prototype in on one of our flagship markets in Great Britain and really tried to understand, based on our kind of thought processes and our hypotheses of kind of what we felt like consumers would want. So we've used that prototype to be able to gain some learnings that have helped underpin kind of the tech platform I mentioned before that we're currently building and we're deploying. And so there were a lot of things that we saw once we added recipes to the site. For example, we saw that site traffic go up, but we also learned that at the point of engagement, it was kind of interesting because we felt like we could offer shoppable recipes where you could go onto a recipe site and be able to click and order it directly. But a lot of people weren't using that in the early days because what they were essentially seeing was that people had those elements in their home or were going to shop for them imminently and just wanted to know how to make a specific drink. So as we started to look through that click stream and that digital journey and understand how people were using the site, we've been able to take some of that back and help inform some of the roadmap that we have in terms of features and functionalities that we plan to build into the bar.com and our other digital sites. But it's also giving us a reason to kind of dig a little bit deeper within our own kind of ethos, if you will, to say from a line extension perspective or from an innovation perspective, we'll have all that data to be able to say, we see a lot of people that are making Long Island iced tea drinks or something along those lines. Do we have the ability to create occasions based on that we can use them not only from sales occasions, but also to be able to kind of create our own, festive dates, so to speak, around some of these things that we're seeing from a digital perspective, people engaging with our sites on. So it's been a really interesting journey. We're learning a lot from a lot of our markets. The bar in Brazil, for example, has been live for several years. It was pre-COVID. But there were some different functionalities that they were looking at adding that they learned over the kind of time when they were locked down in Brazil that they wanted to kind of add in. So each of our markets are kind of informing us in different ways, things they've seen as they've been on the journey. One that's going to help us be able to build in a really good, robust platform that we can deploy to other markets who aren't on that D2C journey yet, but we'll also be able to lower the overall cost of ownership for those existing markets as we migrate those, because we'll be able to take and give them something better than they already have, and also build in a backlog of things that they want quicker than they'd be able to pay for or build them themselves, which is one of the things that's the most exciting for me.
We've got so many great questions that have come in. So I'm only going to ask one more of my own questions, sure, and then we're going to move on, or else these folks aren't going to get a chance to get theirs answered. So what's next? Not necessarily in terms of, the bar.com and the work you're specifically doing for Diageo, but where is your mind? Where's your attention today? There's a lot of folks talking about, metaverse and internet. What is it called? Internet 3. I'm tripping over the word, but what are you thinking in terms of the next big thing that you're starting to pay more and more attention to as it relates to the bar.com, certainly, but as a way of just connecting more closely with that consumer? Where are you at these days?
I think there's some dabbling from a metaverse perspective and a web 3.0. I think that's what you were looking for. So there's different side bets that we're kind of placing just to understand from a digital innovation perspective. We've got a really great team that's focused on that daily in terms of different ways that we can engage consumers. We've had a program that's called Message in a Bottle, which is really fun, that you can scan a QR code, record a message, and then the QR code can go on the bottle as a hang tag or even as a label that you can gift to somebody. And as soon as they scan it, it's a personal personal greeting from you to be able to give to somebody. So different innovations such as that, I think we're going to be a leader in testing a lot of those and see what actually works and scaling the things that do. It's really kind of interesting, the metaverse, if we talk about, what that can look like, because that becomes a deeper engagement point from our brands to be able to kind of own that thought where with consumers, and to be able to take our conversations or their relationships with our brands to a deeper level. So I think, we're getting some robust learnings in some of the initial things that we've done there. But as I mentioned before, some of the work that we're doing in terms of extending the life of our attractions has been a really, critical component from a digital perspective that we're looking to do. So when you come to the Guinness Storehouse in Dublin, or you go to the Johnny Walker Princess Street in Edinburgh, UK, and have that experience, there are things that we can do even post to remind you of what you had as a particular whiskey drink in there, in that environment, and be able to send you that recipe and be able to keep that engagement going, to be able to kind of lengthen that feel of being a part of that attraction from a digital perspective, which we're looking to either influence online or offline sales as a component of it. So I feel like there's a lot of different innovations that are existing either in other CPGs or FMCGs or even different parts of digital that we haven't even brought into our universe yet that we're willing to try. The thing that I'm very buoyed by is the fact that we have a leadership team who is very open to doing a lot of different things that are out of the box. That's been a challenge in different parts of my career and places that I've been, in terms of being able to be innovative and forward thinking and place investments ahead of when those particular things would pay off. So I think that culminating with the kind of rich mind share that we have in terms of actually having a digital innovation team embedded within our organization, I think is going to yield a lot of interesting things that consumers will be able to see and engage with our brands as we go forward over the next couple of years. And I already know there's some fun things in the pipeline that people will see, but we're really kind of thinking about it more that way. It's not as linear as to say, well, metaverse or web 3.0 is coming, we need to dabble in it. Well, it's that, but it's also a lot of other things that we can be very resonant, because we have a lot of mind share with our brands and people have love for those brands that they want to translate based on how they want to engage with us digitally.
Great stuff. I'm going to dive into some of the questions from the folks that are attending. Again, we want to be really respectful of Heath's time. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and submit those now, and we'll go through them as quickly as we can. First one is, what are your thoughts on the recent decline in e-commerce, or a bubble bursting since 2021 for direct-to-consumer? How long do you think it will take to recover to those levels again?
Oh, that's a good question. I think obviously the pandemic had hastened the pace in which people adopted a lot of different parts of digital. That, for example, grocery is one that I think probably was accelerated by several years. But then as the world has started to slowly open back up, people have realized that there are some things in terms of I want to, see the meat that I'm purchasing, or I want to see the produce that I'm purchasing. I want to go into a physical outlet to be able to do some of those things. So I do think the hybrid approach is probably here to stay. I do think that in some cases, you've got a very young population who is now just starting to come into that, earning for themselves, and they've gone through school and they've been digitally focused their entire lives. So their buying patterns and the way that they consume over the next 20 years or so is probably going to skew more digital first and digital primarily than a different generation has. But I think from my perspective, just in terms of when that's going to come back, I think parts of it will come back over time, just out of the simplicity perspective. But I do think in terms of it being the way that it was a couple of years ago, I think we're looking at a hybrid approach probably for the next several years, just in my own opinion, just because I think, we all said at one point, stores are dead, people are all going to buy everything online. And we found out that's not the case. People still want to have that experience of touching, feeling, and seeing items before they purchase, even if they go purchase it online or purchase it on their mobile in front of a store somewhere else. So I don't know that it'll come back to the level it's been before, but I think this hybrid approach is definitely here to stay.
The next question asks about Diageo's business specifically, so maybe you'll want to answer it more from an industry perspective or on a category basis. But the question reads, what's the biggest challenge that Diageo is facing locally in US and globally in driving their direct-to-consumer ambitions?
I think regulations in the US obviously is one of the biggest challenges. So in the US, we've got the bar.com, and that's a platform that we've actually partnered with a company called Reserve Bar. So in a couple of states where selling through an intermediary is legal, we're able to actually sell product in some of those states. But by and large, the patchwork of municipal regulations across the country is just all over the place. So I know Benton County, Arkansas, for example, recently became a wet county. It was a dry county for most of its life, and there's still counties around Benton County that are still dry. So even if you take it on a state level, it goes within a regional or a municipal or a county level. And so being able to kind of go through the landmine of all of those different regulations is going to be a challenge by and large, without disappointing consumers to a point where they're coming on and then they figure out that they can't have something delivered to them because of where they live, and they've gone through that whole process and they end up disappointed. So in the US, that's really been one of our biggest challenges. Obviously, from a taxation perspective, it's very challenging as well, because in a lot of these places, spirits aren't taxed at the same level that beer or wine is. There's different regulations for each, even though they're all alcoholic beverages. And so that's a challenge, not only in the US, but globally we're seeing as well. So just treating things equally in terms of beverage alcohol and spirits has been a challenge for us globally in terms of how we navigate that landscape. But then I think even beyond that, it's a situation where from a direct-to-consumer perspective, marketing to people who are of age and things of that sort has always been a challenge in terms of age gates and how those are, basically mandated from either U.S. government perspective versus kind of the GDPR regulations in the EU, for example. So navigating all of that becomes a really tricky way for us to have to be able to make sure that we are compliant in all the markets that we do business, and being able to do so in a really relevant way. Those are kind of two of the biggest ones I can think of that have been challenges for us.
Next question is quite broad, and maybe your answer is going to have some dependencies based on category. But to what extent do you think brands need to be digital first in this new era?
Great question. It's interesting, right? We've had the advantage for a lot of our brands, such as Guinness, that have been around for a couple of 100 years, that have been loved even before digital was a thing. So taking an established brand and making it a digitally relevant brand can be somewhat easier than taking a brand and having to grow it online versus try to sell it into a store, which can be a bit of a challenge as well. So I think the ethos of the brand at the end of the day becomes really the driver in terms of how you do that. If it feels like the demographics that the brand would be resonant to make sense and are a glove fit with the online consumer, then I think you could probably go digitally, if not native, then certainly digitally first, much more successfully than trying to get any kind of throughput. But Matt, as you know, it's very difficult for products to get sold into a Walmart or get sold into an Amazon, and then you've got to make those sales thresholds in order to be able to even stay on the shelf. Whereas digital, you can do things a lot more scrappy, and you can do things a lot quicker, and even establish credibility just by being able to do a lot of SEO and a lot of digital marketing to be able to make your brand look bigger than it is. So I would say it probably just depends on kind of who you're speaking to, what the brand is, but then also what your ambitions long-term for growing the brand are. I do think that hybrid approach I mentioned before in terms of having good, strong relationships with brick and mortar retailers is going to be critical, because one is going to help fuel the other. I think 5 years ago, we all just thought that, half the Walmart stores in the world were going to end up being either depots or dark stores just to fulfill online delivery. We've seen that's not the case. So I think at some point, the hybrid approach in terms of how brands need to look at how they position themselves and how they go to market, because online does influence offline as well, is probably the best approach.
Yeah. So I think you've just at least partially answered this question, but our friend Charles Kochel, Charles, glad you're here, says, I have a lot of international adult beverage brands reaching out, wanting to sell and distribute in the US. Understanding it's more difficult in the US. What's your advice or direction for these brands?
So obviously, there's a lot of good distributors in the U.S. that are, very astute at how you kind of move into this market and be able to punch through all of the clutter, so to speak. And so those are probably the best ways to do so. For us, we were very fortunate in the sense that we could lift and shift some of our brands from market to market and be able to do so relatively easily, just by virtue of the fact that the ability from a direct-to-consumer perspective in some of these markets enables us to be able to kind of take cases and move them from country to country and be able to have the ability to sell. So I don't know all of the details of this specific request in terms of kind of the thought process there, but that would probably be from a distributor perspective, just kind of getting some guidance there in terms of understanding kind of the best approach to take.
I want to make sure I don't butcher this question too much, but if I understand it correctly, it's talking about, since Diageo has been so successful at building great brands and great products, to what extent do you feel like the direct-to-consumer experience or solution needs to be owned by the brand as opposed to, I guess, experts in the industry? And I'm guessing that means like third parties that really kind of specialize in category or in direct-to-consumer. Does that question make sense?
I believe so. Let me see if I can answer it the right way. And certainly if I don't, somebody can call that out and follow up. I think from my perspective, that authenticity is a really critical thing for people to want to engage directly with a brand. It's hard to fake that authenticity. And sometimes that message can be lost if there's some sort of an intermediary between that somehow has to filter or translates that message. One example of that is a technology that we have around kind of what's your whiskey. So what that does basically is it helps you understand based on your taste profiles for other things to recommend a Scotch whiskey, for example, that might make sense for you, that you might like, that you may not have even tried. So I think being able to have those one-to-one relationships versus it being through an intermediary can be very, engaging for consumers to want to immerse themselves deeper in that brand. And it becomes having a dialogue directly with that brand without there being somebody in the middle, which I think can be a little bit problematic, where there's some of those technologies that we can take and put on an Amazon, for example, but obviously Amazon on a page certainly has a lot of the things that you can and cannot do within that if we as a brand have our own one-to-one relationship with the consumer, there's a lot of different ways that we can take that digital journey that may not fit within the matrix of an Amazon or a Tesco or a Walmart's page, for example. So I think those are the different areas to me that feel like if you're doing things that are adding value that only the manufacturer can really bring that experience to the consumer, that becomes a really big way for you to step above any of those relationships you might have with a retailer or any intermediary, because they're not able to portray your brand or to be able to connect that resonant discussion in the same way.
Talk about rebates as a tool. They feel very outdated and full of friction. Is that something that you still have some success with? What are your thoughts?
So rebates obviously are very tricky in the beverage alcohol industry because of all the regulations. So it's a little bit of a different animal for us. I mean, obviously, when we're trying to do things from a trial perspective, there obviously is an incentivization that's there that we need to account for. But I think within the e-commerce perspective, it becomes very nimble for us to go try something as a limited time type of promotion. For example, in GB, very recently, we had Bailey's apple pie, which was one that we didn't have in a lot of different outlets, but we wanted to try it online just to kind of get a take rate and understand if consumers would resonate towards it. So as I mentioned before, that kind of analogy of the canary in the coal mine becomes a way for us to be able to see if something can actually have some resonance and take off for us versus having to discount it. But obviously there's always going to be a need for, especially in a lot of CPGs, to be able to, offer those different types of rebates or discounts as a component of, if your product's a little bit more commoditized. Ours is a little less so, but, even within that, I think, being able to do digital trials and or loyalty programs where people can buy from you directly and you'd be able to reward them one-to-one for when they purchase from you, I think can be ways to try and circumvent having to do any kind of heavy discounting online.
Next question is about data privacy and what kind of challenges you face as you're collecting first-party data from the platforms.
Great question. And this is one I come up against every day because our organization inherently is very allergic to asking for anything in terms of consumer data. We are a GB owned company, so the GDPR regulations in the EU are quite stringent. And so we are very focused on our data privacy, what we require, what we ask for, being very bare minimum in terms of the legal requirements, but then also having discussions with our legal counsel and folks in terms of saying, this is why we would ask for these things, these are why we might use them, and this is why consumers would want to opt in. So we've had some struggles with that just in early days, candidly, because there is very much concerns over if records got hacked for some reason or something else happens along those lines, that any of that information or that data gets out or gets used for purposes that are less than what they should be. So, we're on a journey right now in terms of how we take and use consumers' data to make sure that we're, ensuring that everything that we do with that, the consumer knows what we're doing with it, that we're very above board when we have that data in terms of explaining exactly what we do with that or where we store that. But then also in our own organization, in terms of understanding for the future, if we have some of these things that are data points that could be used for us to inform future decisions or future things from a marketing or business plan perspective, why we would want to keep that and what the risk versus reward on that is. So it's an ongoing conversation in our organization, and it's a push and a pull. But it's one of those things where I think every organization is going to struggle with that, just because there are so many different requirements around what you can and can't collect, how long you can have it for and whatnot, but making sure that the data that you collect is being used for the purposes that you've informed the consumer that it's being used for, and that it's being kept with the highest level of security possible.
Question about the metaverse, and the question is specifically, what opportunities do you see for Diageo in the metaverse? But I want to reword the question a little bit and say, what kind of experimentation have you and other players in the industry done in the metaverse where you have found some success, or maybe you've not found success, but you've learned an awful lot? Can you talk about some of the executions that you've either been a part of or that you've observed where, again, they've been successful or you've learned a lot from them?
There's been a couple of different kind of ideations that we've had in terms of kind of having a version of the bar online and being able to have an ability to come in and have that engagement within a metaverse kind of environment that we've gotten some kind of preliminary learnings on. And we're looking at, as we go into our kind of next calendar year, what types of investments and where we want to align some of our key brands, because it doesn't work for all of our brands. Some of our brands, especially some of the smaller ones, are ones that don't necessarily have as much resonance there, and they probably wouldn't make as much sense. It wouldn't be a thing that you would find within the metaverse that would be relevant. It would just feel like signposting for marketing's sake. Whereas there's other ones such as Guinness, for example, or Johnny Walker that do have a lot of resonance with consumers, that we can be very relevant in the metaverse environment in terms of celebration. So our brands and our taglines is celebrating life every day, everywhere. So if you take everywhere, that's not only a physical location, it could be a digital or a virtual location as well. So figuring out how we can be relevant in such ways in the metaverse is something that we've had some learning labs on. We've done a couple of different experiments with different events from a metaverse perspective, and we've been very pleased at kind of the engagement and what we've gotten back from some of those. But I do think that we're going to be leveraging it going forward very specifically on a key brand basis, just to make sure that it feels organic and doesn't feel too much like we're just, another place in the universe that is being marketed towards somebody. We want it to feel very organic in terms of the reason why we're there.
Well, in the last part of your answer to that prior question, I think may in part address some of this last question from Rich, which I think is a lot of fun. It says, do you see an opportunity for branded experiences on your digital sites, such as shopping for Captain Morgan merchandise on a pirate ship, or touring the Guinness Brewery virtually for selling Guinness merchandise or products?
Oh, without a doubt. I think that becomes hand in glove with the ability for us to be able to create that resonance, because, not everybody's able to jump on a plane and head to Ireland and be able to experience the Guinness storehouse themselves. So what are the ways that we can digitally bring you an experience that's going to be very similar to that? And then at the end of it, you come in through the virtual gift shop, for example, and be able to select something that you can have sent to you, or even if it's being 3D printed, for example, that could be something very branded as well. So I think there's a lot of applicability for us to be able to take. And as I mentioned before, we are looking at ways to really figure out how we can extend that engagement, if it's in a physical outlet, to the virtual world, or even pre-planning being in a physical location in the virtual world before you even get there. So things in terms of being able to pre-plan a visit to one of our breweries or to one of our distilleries, or being able to have a virtual celebration around a key occasion. So if it was creating a St. George's Day, for example, that was going to be around our gin brands. What are the things that we can do to help you kind of create and invite people to a party where you can create a playlist or things of that sort that can be very, themed around the beverage that you're going to serve at that occasion. So really kind of weaving the online and offline and creating a celebratory in advance and then post event to the things that we do, that the brand becomes the connector between those two events, is something that we are highly engaged in, and we're really looking at our tech platforms to help us deliver in a meaningful way.
This has been such a great conversation, so much fun. Thank you so much to the folks that have joined in and submit such great questions that have taken the conversation to a much higher level. And Heath, thank you so much. It's great catching up with you after all these years, and congratulations on your success, and congratulations on the success of your team and the platform, and just the super cool work that you're doing. So we appreciate you making the time for this. And we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon. Heath Willis, Global Head of Consumer Digital Experiences for Diageo. Thank you very much, and hope you all have a great day.